Hi, and welcome back to Short Story Focus. Thanks for stopping by. Today we're going to be having a look at a Poul Anderson novella entitled Call Me Avatar. Call Me Joe. And what a shame this one got passed over for the Hugo Awards, since they didn't have one organized in time to notice it, because unlike The Longest Voyage, which is regrettable and forgettable, Call Me Joe is a great novella by Poul Anderson. I thought I would like to do a story that I actually do like by Poul Anderson, and that's when it occurred to me that he was the writer of Call Me Joe, which, as I talk about this, you will find reminds you of a certain movie. Poul Anderson had a gigantic science fiction career. He's incredibly revered by other authors and by many fans, even to this day. And so I felt like I needed to give him his due. I felt kind of bad about not liking that last story, so I thought, here we go. I'm going to go ahead and talk about one that I like. The novella Call Me Joe opens up with an action-packed scene of a creature that's known as a pseudo-Jovian. And it is a four-legged creature. It has blue skin. It's like a man, horse, beast, man thing that can survive under the enormous pressures of living on Jupiter, as if Jupiter was like a planet with a surface like Earth that you could get to. In the story, this creature is living its best life on the planet. It's doing all kinds of cool stuff. It is just a rough and tumble, scrappy existence. At one point, it's doing some things and it tears the skin off some animal and starts eating them. What we come to realize almost immediately is that there is a character on one of the moons orbiting around Jupiter who is projecting his mind into the pseudo-Jovian to control it. And the name of that character is Edward Anglesey, and he's in control of the creature. And we come to find almost immediately that Edward Anglesey, living on this moon, is a very unhappy man who's part of this pseudo-Jovian program that they're trying to put together to design and implement this entire system. And the reason is that he's been in a terrible accident, and he is now almost fully disabled from it. He's wheelchair bound, and he is described at one point, or a scene in the story a little later, as basically a head and a crumpled up body, and some limbs. He is understandably a bitter and upset person, because of this massive change in his life. And consequently, it does make Edward Anglesey a little difficult to deal with. Now, there's an administrator on the planet, and his name is Viken, and there's somebody who comes to visit, and his name is Cornelius. And Cornelius is coming to as a representative and an investigator on the Psionics Corporation that is part of this device that allows people like Edward Anglesey to project their minds into these pseudo-Jovian creatures that are on the planet's surface. And so they have plans for all of this. They want to populate the entire planet with, this comes up later in the story, they want to populate the entire planet with these amazing pseudo-Jovian creatures. They're going to survive and do their thing and live down there. And over time, they're hoping that they'll grow their own population, and that what they will do is use their mental control devices with their people on the planetary base, the moon base, controlling them. What they will do is control the political leaders of these four-legged man-beast things. They'll control the religious leaders, other important people, but for the most part, they want these creatures to develop their own complete culture on the planet. And then they probably would plan to use them for other forms of exploration throughout the solar system, and probably later the galaxy, because these things are incredibly tough. In the opening scenes, Edward Anglesey is reveling in the thought. The creature that he controls takes a theropod off a wall and rips some skin off and starts eating, and then he drinks a giant mug full of methane. So yeah, this is a pretty tough character. There's a telling scene within Call Me Avatar where the main character is talking with someone, and they're looking over these things called K-tubes. The K-tube is part of the mental psionic projection that Ed has with the planetary surface. He has such a strong bond with his pseudo-Jovian that he's actually able to maybe burn out the circuit, so to speak. And just as a quick sidebar, in case you don't know what a tube is. Now, I would assume that most people of a certain age do know what tubes are for electronic devices. But maybe if you're younger, you haven't heard of that because you've only ever been alive in the digital age, which means that you've only ever been alive in the solid state age. And before there were solid state components, a lot of those things were taken up in a control manner by tubes. So these were beautiful, elegant looking glass structures that, were all different sizes. And it was pretty neat. If you take the back off a TV and look in there, like when I was a kid, you would see all these amber colored little lights and electronics within these little glass spheres and tubes of many different shapes. And I remember if somebody threw out a TV in the neighborhood, the first thing we'd do is go raid all those tubes out of there and go break them by throwing them against the wall, because they were vacuum sealed and they would explode when they hit the wall. And that's the kind of fun you had when you were a kid. When I was a kid, because we didn't have phones, so breaking tubes against the wall was, that was good fun. What has been discovered is that Jake is blowing out one of these tubes, or he's overriding it. And in the old days, when something stopped working and it ran on tubes, then you had to find the tube that wasn't working and replace it, or you had to find why that tube was overloading. And so ostensibly that's why Cornelius is on hand. They're trying to get to the bottom of the where, what, and the why of all of it. So there's always kind of a fascinating scientific angle like that with old science fiction. Old science fiction, up through into the 60s, science fiction features mechanics and scientists, very competent, mentally able people, mostly men, who fix things. It's a really cool thing in a lot of Samuel Delany stories. There are people who are repairing, building, and fixing things all the time. For those of us from the blue-collar classes, this is a common experience, right? Many of us make a living fixing things. So it creates these characters that you can relate to. So these two guys are on a moon base orbiting Jupiter, and they've got a guy projecting his mind into a beast down on the planet, and yet these people are all completely relatable. So that makes this story very interesting that way. Even Edward Anglesey, a man who is in a way broken, and who is maybe going to be repaired, ultimately by this program, is someone that we can relate to, because we've all been hurt. And we all know what it's like to have something catastrophic happen in our lives. Unfortunately for poor Ed, he had like the ultimate catastrophe in getting hurt in this accident, and that's made him who he is. And as much as that is regrettable, it has also made him perfect for the program. There's another scene in the story that shows just how angry Ed is as a person. He's very unhappy, and there's one of his fellow people in this facility that he's living on this base, on this moon. He has a kind of an interaction with that guy, but that guy is a bit unflappable in his human interactions, and this is where they come to start to understand that maybe there's something going on with the mental processes in Ed Anglesey, and he might be unique or special in some way that could be relevant to the program. In Ed Anglesey's most private moments, when he thinks about it, he is very unhappy in his body, and we are led to believe, for many reasons why. And these are things worth discovering by reading the story. You get a little bit of the internality of Ed Anglesey, and you begin to understand, who he is and why he is the way he is. And although you may think you understand it, because of course he's been so badly injured, there are other things to be uncovered there. So also what it is that when Ed is in the pseudo-Jovian, he is just immensely powerful, and he has a connection with the creature. The creature, they think the creature just shuts down, sits, and waits for him to come back, and that's the supposition with the whole program. But Ed is assuming that something else is going on there, because he's feeling something else, that he and this creature are one, even when the psi machines are turned off. There's an interesting part in the story where the characters are telling someone else how they get the pseudo-Jovians down on the planet, because this is a bit of a tricky business for them. And what it comes down to is that the pseudo-Jovian horse-man thing creatures, they're also woman thing creatures in the future. It's the plan for them to have a whole society down there. But anyway, the devices that deliver them, they gestate them, and they're grown in there. They're kind of a in vitro type thing going on through to gestation and all that. And when the ships carry this device down and drop it, and then the pseudo-Jovian comes out of it. And so that entire process is described, right down to the pseudo-Jovian squeezing out of a canal, and at no point in that entire description is the word vagina used. I guess in 1957, in a science fiction story, you couldn't say, you know, the pseudo-Jovian is impregnated into the device, and it grows and gestates, and then it goes down a birth canal and emerges out of this, I guess, artificial vagina, and is born, and then is ready to be inhabited by somebody's mind from the moon colony base place or whatever. So, but back then, science fiction was well known for not being able to say naughty words like vagina. There's a lot to discover in this story, and I haven't even scratched the surface. But what I would like to do is read a quote from the end of the story. So yeah, I'm going to actually read the end of the story to you. One of the interesting things that comes up in the story as it's going along is that there are many other potentialities that could be gained from being able to project your mind into another being, right? Especially as you get older, especially as you get really older, and your body becomes decrepit just from the force of age, shall we say. You know, senescence is inevitable for everybody. You're all going to experience it. If you've seen the movie Avatar, then you know exactly what is in hand for Ed Anglesey. And what happens in Avatar is exactly what happens in the novel. Of course, it happened in the novella. And of course, it happened in the novella first. I'm going to go ahead with that in mind, knowing that there's a pretty good chance everybody watching this video right now, all 5 of you who will decide to watch this, have already seen Avatar. So you know what's going on here. So just exactly like Avatar decided to do with this great story idea, Ed Anglesey is going to stay in his pseudo-Jovian, who he had such an affinity for and such a connection with, and he just loved that, you know, barbaric, hard-scrabble life that the pseudo-Jovian offered him on the planet's surface. He felt like he was more than he ever was before inside that thing, and so he decided to become one with it. And there are people, you know, in the facility who think that's nuts, and they also don't think it's possible. And there are other people who realize that, you know, he didn't die on an operating table, you know, he left. And so it's kind of a fascinating idea. To wrap up the review with that in mind, I'm going to go ahead and read a quote here from the story. And yes, the quote that I'm going to read you is the actual closing of the story. So if you don't want to see that, I would recommend that you tune out now, because that's what I'm going to wrap it up with. And since this is such an old story and you've all seen the movie Avatar, it's really not all that shocking to see how all this winds up, but it is interesting to see how Poul Anderson puts it together at the end here. And so Cornelius is speaking, and he says, "Oh yes, of course," said Cornelius. "He is still himself. Remember, now that he has none of the cripple's frustrations, he should be more amiable, and when the novelty of his new friends wears off, he will want someone who can talk to him as an equal." And they're referring to the other pseudo-Jovians. "And precisely who will operate another pseudo?" asked Viken sarcastically. "I'm quite happy with this skinny frame of mine, thank you." So he doesn't want to take any chances with his ass. "Was Anglesey the only hopeless cripple on Earth?" asked Cornelius quietly. Meaning there's a whole pool of people ready to go, ready to take this on. They just have to be asked. "And there are aging men, too," went on the psionicist, half to himself. "Someday, my friend, when you and I feel the years close in, and so much we would still like to learn, maybe we, too, would enjoy an extra lifetime in a Jovian body." He nodded at his cigar. "A hard, lusty, stormy kind of life. Granted dangerous, brawling, and violent. But life as no human perhaps has lived it since the days of Elizabeth I. Oh yes, there will be small trouble finding Jovians." He turned his head as the surgeon came out again. "Well," croaked Viken. The doctor sat down. "It's finished," he said, in reference to Anglesey. They waited for a moment awkwardly. "Odd," said the doctor. He groped after a cigarette he didn't have. Silently, Viken offered him one. "Odd. I've seen these cases before. People who simply resigned from life. This is the first one I ever saw who went out smiling. Smiling all the time." So to wrap it up, I would say that this novella is well worth reading. I really do recommend this one. I think that you'll enjoy it. I've left enough of it out in my explanation, even in telling you the ending. It is still well worth reading. So I hope that you enjoy this novella by Poul Anderson. Highly recommended.